And that's how policing was seen at one stage. If you were going to make a career of it, you'd be gay, and on the female side. And if you were heterosexual, then you'd have children and leave.
When you're in the thick of a problem, a mindset, a challenge, you're so close to it, you have no perspective.
Seek to understand, because you can't make any decisions until you understand what the issue is and all sides of that issue.
And that for me is important in goal setting. It's about breaking things down into bite-sized chunks, into manageable chunks that we can then do, even though the whole might look too tough.
So I look back now, and a lot of the respect that I had from officers was because I'd been there on the ground and I'd done it all the way up.
Welcome back to another episode of Success is a System. I'm Mike Greene, and today we're very honoured and pleased to have Julie Spence with us. Now, where do I start? Julie, I've got a whole list of things here. Was the Chief Constable for Cambridge, got an honorary doctorate for law in 2008. In 2010, got the Queen's Police Medal, is the Lord Lieutenant for Cambridgeshire, has been since 2017, representing our Queen, and now King Charles, has been a leading member of the Association of Chief Police Officers, president of the British Association for Women in Policing. How do you write a CV? All of these awards alone are just, it's so impressive, and you must be very proud.
Yeah, I am very proud, but it's sort of an example of a life well lived and a lot of hard work.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And hard work, does that come from your upbringing? I mean, I often like to start with, where did it all begin when you were young at school, family environment? What tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, it did. I was born, I was actually born in Framlingham, now made famous by Ed Sheeran, used to be made famous by the Castle.
Oh, right.
But my father was a farmer, but actually what was true was he was a farm labourer, because he actually worked for his father, and he had to say thank you for his wages every week at the behest of his mother. But he was a hard worker, and that was where hard work. He was up, every morning 5 o'clock, and often didn't go back to bed until late at night.
And we're surrounded by farmers here. And a few years ago, I helped them because the then council leader was trying to kick thousands of acres of tenant farmers out to put solar in, and it's great grade 1 and 2 agricultural land. And I remember at the time speaking to some of the farmers, and they were saying, we're not landed gentry farmers, we're tenant farmers, and you might save up for a deposit on a house, but our son's been saving up for his first combine or for a lease or on a tenancy, and so on. And you just see the real hard work ethic. And at the time, to see a few of those people who had been farming for 40, 50 years broken to tears to believe that the tenancy, which had started with the Duke of Bedford when he gifted 10-acre strips to different farmers, and by marriage it evolved into 300, 400 and so on, was potentially going to be taken away by the council that wanted to put solar panels on it. And I mean, it got me close to that farming community, and it's hard to grow up in that community without a strong sense of work and community.
Yeah. And I have to say that I think there was a sort of vision of farmers of being very affluent, having lots of land, but this was an area not quite like the tenant farmers, but only had a couple of 100 acres. His father had actually gone to Canada because farming was so tough here, and they stayed out there for 15 years. In fact, he was born in Canada, and had to come back because they just couldn't endure any more of the harsh winters. There's pictures of him on horseback, and I just think, in the early 1900s, 1920, my grandfather himself was a pioneer. He went across to Canada to try to make a living.
Courage,
and I just think it wasn't an era of tractors and combine harvesters. It was real hard grind. And then, they came back. And actually, that ruined my father's desire ever to travel, because I think from the moment they left Canada to the moment they got back to England, he was ill.
Oh, God. So he wanted to go back to Canada?
Yeah, well, I just think he just never wanted to go on a boat or a plane or anything ever again. Thank you very much.
Well, it's interesting because we've been here for 25 years now nearly, but it's 1880s farmhouse. And when we bought it off the farmer, I said, look, it's lovely and we're so glad to be have the opportunity to buy this. But I've got to ask you, why would you sell? Because they'd had 5 generations of the family here. And he said, well, let me tell you, he said, farming can be an amazing business. He said, but if for the last 5 years you've worked every day to lose £5,000 because the wheat price had dropped, so it can be a very thankless task as well. It's not like doing a job and getting a wage, doing a job and getting a wage. You do all the work and you don't know how it's going to turn out.
Well, it was my first touch. Now I know with mental health issues, because my grandfather. I came home one day from school and my grandfather was having a meeting with my father, and there'd been a decision that they had to sell the farm because he couldn't go on any further. He had what they then called a nervous breakdown, which now we know is sort of deeply traumatic mental health issue.
But because it wasn't physical, wasn't recognised back then.
Yeah, it wasn't. They call a nervous breakdown, and I think the nervous breakdown covered many things, but the numbers weren't adding up, and it was just
terrifying.
Terrifying for them. And they were at the forefront of pioneering. Because I even remember them farming initially without a tractor. So we had a horse called Queenie, one of the lovely Suffolk punchers that I now see people are trying to preserve. But then they went to a tractor, and they had one of the very, very first tractors, and then they had a first combine harvester, but they just couldn't make it work. And so, it is a myth that if you come from a farming background, then you come from a wealthy background, because that's absolutely not true. There's so much hard graft that goes on. And my father was doing lots of things on the side to try and make a little bit extra money. So he had his own pigs. He would breed rabbits, in those early days.
Well, and so many people see the romantic view of a tractor out in the field in the summer and don't realise how you get a downpour that can lay the crop down, and you can't, it can destroy what could have been otherwise a good crop, and you've got to be out in it, whatever the weather and so on. But growing up, did you get involved in that farming, or was you at school? What
it was from 0 to 11. Then my father had to do a complete change of career, although he initially wanted to become to be his own tenant farmer, but that didn't work out. So he actually became a sub-postmaster, and it was the best thing he ever did. So he went from farming into a business, which he played to my mother's strength, because she'd actually worked in the post office as a youngster.
Okay.
But in terms of farming, did I get involved? No, not really. I used to enjoy it. I didn't realise the turmoil that was going on behind. So I was making castles out of bales in the summer, and enjoying fishing around the pond, and shouting at the pigs, and just enjoying nice sort of country atmosphere. So it was as I got older I suddenly realised
when you look back,
the real hardship. Oh yeah, definitely. I always used to think my father was being mean on Christmas morning when we as little kids were desperate to open our presents, and he would come in from milking the cows and not get in till about 7, and we were desperate to open them. And he'd have his breakfast, and we probably wouldn't get to open them till 8, which was far too late, as any youngster knows.
They're up at the minute their eyes open.
Exactly.
And in that regard, I was just thinking, as you were saying there, with children, it's always the challenge of, do we protect them from the real issues that we're dealing with that are going on, and the fact that money might be tight or so on, or do we expose it to them and let them learn from it? But I think as parents, often we don't want to tell our kids this stuff, and it isn't often until they look back and see that they realise how tough things might have been. And I don't know if that's the right answer, because we can wrap them in cotton wool and actually hurt them by not telling them, can't we?
I think I did know that money was tight, because the only time, I was desperate, as a lot of young girls are, to ride, and I could never have my own pony. But there was a guy who we called Uncle Tony, who lived up the road, who had quite a few horses, and so we'd look after them for a while. So I got that. But my granny, who would save her money up, she was the one that bought me a pair of jumper boots. My parents couldn't afford to do that. So I was well aware that there were certain things that I might want that they would never be able to afford. So, but I was sort of grateful for some understanding, not necessarily the warts and all of clearly what was going on in my grandfather's life in terms of how he could or couldn't manage.
And how about ambition? Did you know what you wanted to do at school, or what did you want to do when you were at school? Because initially I had my own sort of, I didn't realise it was a trauma, but because I went to secondary school initially in Framlingham, I passed 11 plus, I went to a grammar school. So I was fortunate from that perspective. But then, because my father changed career, I had to then move schools. And I now realise, for any kids, that 6 months of schooling in one secondary school to then go to a 6 months very different syllabus in another school affected my whole
career at school.
Right.
So particularly for English, maths and French, they had different syllabus and
And
different
was it
styles of
all the
teaching it.
academia, or was it the friendship groups you losing and having to start again as well?
No, not really. I don't really remember the friends I made at Mills Grammar School, and I only remember partially the friends I made at Corsica. I have a funny feeling I was slightly independent anyway, and just in terms of whether that made me independent.
Yeah,
I had friends, but not what some people would call best friends and acquaintances. But yeah, so I think that gave me a bit of independence. But also going from, I think one thing that did help actually was that they often say is going from a girls' school. Because in a girls' school, you don't necessarily see the hurdles and the failures. And perhaps, this is often a discussion when I was in policing around, boys can sometimes hold girls back. And there is a theory in which the Springboard programme, which we looked at in terms of developing women, was that mixed personal development is not the best way to go around personal development, because the nurturing nature of girls means they often will support the boys and help them through the personal development plan, whereas they won't look at their own. So if you do it on their own, so Springboard actually had the Springboard programme for women, and they did Navigator for the guys.
So if they're helping the boys, do you think that's a kind of learned behaviour to look after, or do you think it is just girls do that more than boys, as opposed to put self first?
It could be a learned behaviour. It could also be part of boys and girls bonding as you go forward. How do you work on a relationship? And whether the research would show the same now, I'm not sure. But that was really the bit. Why aren't women taking their place? And this was, dare I say, 20, 30 years ago when the programme was started. Why aren't women taking their place where they ought to be in terms of their ability? And we knew that in policing from, we had more women with degrees at sergeant level, but they weren't necessarily reflected in the numbers in the ranks. So what is this? What's stopping and what's holding women back? And that research started to open a few eyes in terms of the personal development. Yeah. I'm not saying that you shouldn't network, because the whole thing is around when you network, you have to have network with men and women and the best in the field. You don't just network with women, because it would be a pretty sad society if women only networked with women and men only networked with men.
No, and I saw in preparing for today, I saw in a short interview you did with some students where you were talking about when you went into policing there was 7% women, and when you left it was 27%. Is that right? And what stuck with me is to answer one question you said. And it doesn't need to be more male, because it's far more, and always has been, more about brains than brawn.
Yep.
And it made me think, because in fact, so many of our problems now are either online, or they are corruption or fraud, and so on. And we tend to think of sorting the drunks out on a Friday night, as opposed to the research and collation of information and the brain work behind solving a case.
Yeah.
And therefore, even at 27%, it doesn't seem like the mix is equitable.
Yeah, but it's gone on since then. I think you'll find today that almost 50% of the chief constables are women.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, so I think that we are, but because policing is a career, and it tends to last 30 and now probably 35 to 40 years. You're going to take a while to get through that. So starting it when we started it in around 1998, 2000, well, actually even before that, looking to make sure that women achieved their potential and benefited the organisation. Because it's not about just achieving your potential, whatever that might be. It's about doing what you do best for the public. Because ultimately we're a community service. So it's around how you deliver, and we bring both men and women and the best of men and women together to deliver the best we can for the public.
No, and another point in that, it was a couple of looked like teenage girls, but they had some really good questions.
They did.
And one of the areas you got into talking to with them was, obviously there was already prejudice between male and female in the role when you were there, but you talked about having to chase someone in a female police uniform which had a skirt, which actually meant that you didn't even have the right clothing to be able to do the job properly. So not only are you expected to do it differently, but you are not equipped because you're as a woman in the uniform and stuff to do it.
Absolutely, and part of it was, you think back now, why did people think that it was actually okay for women to do the job in a skirt when actually that inhibited running after anybody? Did they think that we shouldn't run after anybody? And then, from women's perspective, that you'd only be doing half the job. And not saying we can catch everybody we run after, but neither can all the boys. They can't catch everybody they run after either. And that's where the brains come in, because a lot of the dealing with the drunks on a Friday night, which still is an issue and a problem, it's not about the brawn. It's not about getting rough and tough with them. It's sometimes about talking them down, because you just incense things more if you go in hard.
Yeah.
So it's that old stereotype about let's go in hard and bang a few heads. That doesn't work.
You're absolutely right. And my background primarily was retail, and then when I had a research business looking at changing consumer and shopper behaviours, we got into hospitality. And interestingly, in shops and in pubs, it was often better to have a female manager, because the men, the minute their issues elevated, their kind of anger rises, and they are more prone to take it physical. Whereas the women were always better to talk it down. They kept their hands by their sides. They didn't kind of even move their arms in or gesticulate in an aggressive manner. But the men tended to incite what could be a volatile situation into a fight, as opposed to talking it down. So no, I think that's a really good point, actually. Which is interesting.
Hope you're enjoying Success is a System. Every Tuesday we launch it on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Drop us a note and tell us who you would like to see or hear on Success is a System, or what subjects you'd like us to cover to help you and your business. Success is a System. Like, subscribe, and make sure you get it every Tuesday for great lessons and systems that have made people wealthy, healthy and successful.
But you didn't start in policing.
No, I didn't. I have to say, going back to school, which you asked about, my role models and my inspiration came from my PE teachers. I don't know why. And actually, the senior PE teacher was also biology. I mean, I used to love sciences. Actually, I used to love anything other than maths, English and French, if the truth be known, which is probably why I had to work really hard at that. So because I focused on sports and the subjects I liked doing, I don't know, I just attracted, because they were, I don't know, they were women who were confident, who were supportive, who were fun, and I just thought I would like to do what you do. Yeah. So I decided that I wanted to be a physical education and a biology teacher. So that was pretty good at that time, because if you went to careers advice, you would get things like, well, you could be a secretary. No, thank you. And the other thing that was seen to be acceptable was a teacher. I have to say, my mother, bless her, she got me a careers book, because the careers advice that you got in school is not the best. And I was looking at it, and the thing actually, interestingly, I liked was forensic science and meteorology. I liked both of those. I thought, but I then thought, far too much science really required, and to tick boxes. I was good at it, but I didn't think I was exceptionally good at it. So I thought, no, actually, what I want to do is I want to be a teacher. And actually, from being probably a bit disruptive in school, I focused down, because I knew what I wanted to do. So I knew I had to get at least 5 O-levels, and I knew I had to apply and get into one of the specialist teacher training colleges, which were for physical education. So once I had a mission and a goal, I then really buckled down and got going. But then I surprised the school, because the school never had me in the Oxford, Cambridge category that you might want a bit extra assistant, and I remember being really anxious about my O-level results, and Mrs. Rankmore, who lived in our village, who was the English teacher, went into school and said, I'll get them for you. So she got one from my parents. And they were all bowled over, because I think I got 8 O-levels, which was better than some of the, the stars were supposed to be getting. And that was quite interesting, because I went back in for the 6th form in the September, and I'd suddenly gone from being about that level to being that level. And that was an interesting move.
Anything happened other than that?
No.
So it wasn't that... Did you surprise yourself with those results, firstly? Because often I talk to a lot of people, and where they've achieved more or better than they thought in school, they were surprised as some of the teachers, but often because they just assumed that the teachers would put you in the right box.
Yeah.
Because they're a teacher, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that for me, it was around the hard work. My mother will tell you, I absolutely used to work my socks off in trying to understand what the syllabus was about. I went, and actually this was a lesson later in life, to learn how you do the exams. So albeit that I never really caught up from losing that first 6 months of education in English, maths and French, I understood what I needed to do, particularly for maths, to make sure I got a grade. So, concentrate on the Part A paper, really get that right, and then get the workings out right, even if you don't get the result right. So I understood the exam system and I worked for that. I mean, you still don't know what's going to come up on the paper and you hope the system works. So I think it was definitely, coming into it again, hard work.
And that's why often with Success as a System, what we're looking for is how adapting, learning a system can help you in different parts of life. And I know my girls also were very focused on the process of the exam, how the exam worked, what type of questions come up. And actually you could have more knowledge but not know the system and do worse than if you knew how to do the exam and had enough content to be able to group it into that system, as it were.
Although people sometimes tend to be anti-exam, I'm actually not, because I think it's one of those things that you have to do, and it's like anything in life, you need to learn how to do it and how to achieve through it. And so it is about understanding it, going to all the revision sessions, doing some practice ones, but it's also about time management, because you only have so much time in the exam. And it's not spending an hour on the question you like and 10 minutes on the question you don't like. You're far better to spend 40 minutes on the question you like and
understand
then
where the points are. And equally that's in business. I constantly remember saying when we had a research business and we were trying to get output to lots of different global suppliers and retailers and so on, and some of the analysts were so distracted by getting it 100% right that they would feel it was important to miss deadlines. And yet you'd say, if we're talking brain surgery, you probably want it 100% right. But actually, if that client doesn't get it by this deadline, they miss the opportunity to go into that board, which affects budgets. So actually 95% today is better than 100% never. And that timing element, whether it's timing around an exam or preparation in the build up, I've spoken at a lot of schools, which is I guess what I got the honorary doctorate for, but I used to talk about my daughter, one of them is a musician, and both did a bit of music early in school, and I would realise, even though it make your ears bleed when they first start learning, it's 15 minutes every day, 20 minutes every day. And so I'd share this with people 6 months before they were doing GCSEs or A-levels, and saying, look, you've been told where they think your grade is. Firstly, that's where they think your grade is. It doesn't have to be where the grade is.
No, it doesn't, actually.
And secondly, if you just put 15 minutes into 3 subjects between now and that exam, I almost guarantee you'll go up 1 grade. That extra 1 grade in those 3 areas might open a different door to you, which could transform and be a new beginning to a completely different life than if you just carry on as you are today. So, and that for me is important in goal setting. It's about breaking things down into bite-sized chunks, into manageable chunks that we can then do, even though the whole might look too tough.
And I think that's what happens to youngsters. If you look at the exams, you look at your exam schedule, it looks enormous. But if you start, and I suppose this is what I did. I didn't realise I was good at organising until I did it. But I would put my revision into sort of blocks. I would actually have plans as to what I was going to be doing and how I was going to be concentrating. I was a great crammer in terms of I had to be still reading at 10 o'clock the night before, and then it would sink in for the morning, and then I would come out fresh. So
you went on, did a 4-year teaching degree in Liverpool. Got qualified as a teacher of physical education and biology. Went into teaching, and it was the best thing you could ever do.
Of course not. No, in fact, I followed love. I then met my first husband, and I went to the West Country, and I had a job at Sidcutt School in Winscombe, which is a co-educational Quaker school. and I'd never worked in a co-educational Quaker private school or anything like that before. I actually didn't even know what Quakers were. I do now, clearly. And I was the only one responsible for girls' PE, but then I was working with somebody else for the biology. So, yeah, I would never advise anybody to go in to be head of something when on your first job.
No,
it's always
that
better to
sounds
have
tough.
some. Yeah, it was.
But a good compliment. I mean, they must have.
Yeah, it was a compliment, but it was. I have to say, it's a compliment that I bit off, and it I have to say, not quite almost killed me, but I had flu in one of those, and I was really, really ill, and I came home and I slept almost for a week. But some of that was also because with my job, I was also assistant head of a girls' house. So looking after 14-year-old girls and putting them to bed and getting them up in the morning is probably why I've never had children. I think it put me off absolutely, knowing what the teenage years was going to actually be like. So yeah, and to be honest, I hated it. I absolutely hated it.
And so you lasted a year. How quickly did you know, oh my God, teaching's not for me?
And I've reflected on this frequently when people have asked, when did I suddenly realise? It was a February morning. It was really cold. I was umpiring a girls' hockey match. I had a tin whistle in my mouth. And because it was so cold, it was sticking to my lips. The girls would rather watch the boys play rugby. And I thought, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And from that moment on, I knew it was just not for me, and I had to look at something else. So I wondered initially, was it the private school environment I didn't actually like? Because for me, the little things kids did became monumental. They became as if they were a world crisis. And I thought, that's out of all proportion to reality. So I didn't find that very pleasing from that perspective. So I thought, should I go into the public school sector, as in, the government sector? Would I find that better? And I did think about it. But luckily for me, my first husband, who was in the Merchant Navy as a cadet officer, decided that he wanted to spend more time ashore with me. And he applied to Avon Fire Brigade and Avon and Somerset Police. And again, fortunately for me, Avon and Somerset Police were really quick on the recruitment, and they recruited him to be an officer. So when I was going through these thoughts about what do I want to do, I thought, I think I could do that.
Because you're hearing each day.
Yeah,
what
I was
his
hearing what
job's
he was
about.
doing, what he was seeing. I mean, I remember when Merseyside Police came to the college in Liverpool, and they were trying to recruit at the time, and I thought, oh no, I couldn't do that, because I was somebody. If anybody mentioned blood, I had to undo my collar, and I thought, we're always dealing with blood, and I couldn't be doing that job. It would be horrendous. And I thought, well, I'm not here training as well for 4 years to suddenly go off and be a police officer. Why would I suddenly change careers? Little did I know. 18 months down the line.
In terms of success and systems, I'd love to unpick some of that, because I think there's so many useful tips and lessons in there, in the sense that I think lots of people find themselves in the wrong job and think, oh, I've trained for it now, it'll be a waste. My parents might be embarrassed or ashamed or whatever. And was it scary? Or was it liberating to know that
It was scary initially, because I felt I had to tell my mum, and I thought, they have just put me through 4 years of university. They were really happy with my career choice. I thought, what on earth are they going to think when I say that I hate this and I'm going to leave? And in fact, when I built up courage to tell my mother, she was really supportive. And she said, you have to do what's right for you.
That's all you want to hear at that point.
That's absolutely all you want to hear. And then I put in my application for the police service. And that was done with a great deal of confidence, not realising that when I was recruited, that I was the first married woman they ever took.
Oh, right. Okay.
And the reason I was the first married woman, because if you think about that era, the view was you take young women, they meet a husband, they have a first child, and probably leave. If they don't leave after the first child, they'll leave after the second. And the system would then have put pressure on people to
So the system,
left.
in effect, was prejudiced because it believed if you were married, they didn't have long to exploit you before you would have children.
Exactly,
sort of.
Definitely.
And yet you intended not to have children.
No.
So it's okay.
But
you could have been prejudiced by it.
Yeah, I definitely could have. But the best thing, I think, was probably interviewed by a senior officer who was openly gay, and she could see the potential. And I was really, I was fortunate on a number of levels. So there were, and that's how policing was seen at one stage. If you were going to make a career of it, you'd be gay, and on the female side, and if you were heterosexual, then you'd have children and leave. And of course, the military were exactly the same. And you would see, and we got the legacy of this later. In fact, we did encourage women who wanted to come back after they'd had children, but you don't see that anymore. You know, women who want to juggle a family and a career, it's really possible, really easy. Easy. I have to say, I do take my hats off to Chief Constables with 3 children. You know, it's and if you talk to Elizabeth Neville, who was the Chief Constable of Wiltshire, she didn't. It's also the thing about telling your boss what the impact on your family life is. So she was an assistant chief in Sussex. She used to. He used to have a 7:30 meeting of his command team. So she would take the kids to the bus stop, but she'd put them in the phone box until the bus or Mrs. X came along, and then they were allowed to come out of the phone box. So that was the only way that she felt she could keep her kids
whereas
safe.
half an hour later for the meeting could have.
So once she told him this, he was horrified, and he made sure that the meetings were half an hour later. But it's that courage to tell somebody the impact it's actually having. So for a small change,
it's courage, but also one of the things you said was the little things the kids did when you was in that unhappy place were monumental. Which was completely out of perspective. You said, but the reality is when you're in the thick of a problem, a mindset, a challenge, you're so close to it, you have no perspective. And it is only when you step out and up that you realize I had that whole conversation only with myself and came to the conclusion that he would say no, only with myself. When what have I got to really lose? To just ask the question or to let it be known. And I do wonder if in school we should get into a bit more behavioural understanding, that there are different behaviours and so on, conflict resolution, and also that conflict isn't all negative. Conflict is often just disagreeing, but disagreeing with an intent of getting to an understanding, which actually is a really positive thing. But often the minute we think there's any kind of conflict in a conversation or an ask, we often have a conversation with ourselves and talk ourselves out of it before asking the question.
Well, I always think the same with a grievance procedure in an organisation. So you have a grievance against X. It tends to be the first person who raises the grievance, then sets an investigation off. And because of the first person, they think they're right. And initially, you think the system probably thinks they might be right. But actually, a good outcome for a grievance procedure is to agree to disagree. Because 2 people come at things from 2 different perspectives. One will like it, one won't like it, or whatever. Doesn't necessarily mean that either of them are wrong. It just means that actually something isn't right and they have to agree to disagree. You might then agree to do something else about how you can ameliorate it. But it doesn't mean to say A is bad and B is good, or B is bad and A is good.
No,
it means
and they don't have to change their view, but they should understand that there's not just their view.
Yeah, and it's about vindication because you won the grievance. Nobody wins a grievance procedure. It's actually should be an organisational conversation around why did it go wrong. Now there are some that will be personally related, and actually there will be more right than wrong. But I've seen more in my career of actually being a balance about, you have to agree to disagree, guys, because actually you're seeing things through the same things through different lenses.
Well, and interestingly enough, you said nobody wins a grievance procedure. Interestingly, often in any conflict, it's automatically seen as there has to be a winner and a loser. And therefore, all sorts of egos come into play as opposed to let's have a conversation. And can we get to a better understanding? Is there any move in that conversation? And that plays out not only throughout people's lives or careers, but in business all the time. People avoid that negotiation or because they assume so much as opposed to just, look, I'm going to put myself in that position. I'm going to go in there positive. I'm not going to get angry. I'm going to try and put it in a way that I think is constructive. And that's got to be positive. But if it is, even calling it a grievance procedure, when you're asking for that meeting, the stage has been set for conflict, hasn't it? As opposed to a conversation.
Part of my sort of philosophy as Chief Constable was always seek to understand. So before you make any decision,
So first to
understand,
understand, you need to be understood.
understand, what's happening on either side or whatever you're doing is seek to understand, because you can't make any decisions until you understand what the issue is and all sides of that issue.
Absolutely. So you go into policing.
Yeah.
Did you love it immediately, or because you obviously had a meteoric rise? And I want to get into some of the roles you've had because they're fantastically interesting. But I think it's hard for people to do very well unless they really love what they do. So it would suggest to me that you loved it.
I did, but actually, from the moment I joined, I loved it. It was just refreshing. And as far as I was concerned, every long weekend that we had was like having a half term every month.
Right.
So, going back from
yes, as opposed to school.
Yeah.
Especially the boarding school environment.
Yeah, and that was the only thing I didn't say. That the killer blow was the only day off I had was a Tuesday. So you were literally, when people say that teachers have long holidays, I have to say that a lot of that is recovering from the fact, particularly in the private sector, one day off a week quite often.
Well, and even within the days, it's like 7 a.m. to 9 p.m.
Oh yeah,
they're long days.
Yeah, no, and policing was defined. It was hard work. You sort of lived hard, worked hard, really, and I really enjoyed it. But my aspiration was not to stand still and stay a constable for the rest of my life.
And were you always? I mean, just the growth is inspirational and very impressive, but it was so quick. Were you always focused on the next position you were targeting, or did you have someone who sort of was like almost a godparent? In the oil industry, when you went to work there, you were given a godfather, which is someone more senior who is watching your career normally and is going to make sure you're not held back and is going to make sure you get broad experiences. Did you have was there any mentoring in the police in that sense?
It was purely me. And I say that because I didn't get on the fast track scheme, which is because I came as a graduate. People thought I probably would get on the fast track scheme. I still don't understand it, which is why the Strategic Command course, which is a similar 3-day assessment that you do to become a senior officer, I really wanted to understand the system because I think I was very naive. I don't think I understood what the fast track system was. It was a bit like starry eyes, But I have to say, in hindsight, I'm glad I wasn't on the fast track, because I look back now and a lot of the respect that I had from officers was because I'd been there on the ground and I'd done it all the way up. I hadn't done any sort of fast through the initial stages, because the initial grounding, I suppose this is the bit of it. This is the bit that's really important. The grounding is so important to actually then build the next level. And also the skills that you've already got are so important, because at that time, it literally was, for promotions, dead men's shoes. So I did 7 years, I think, as a constable. And on average, people were getting promoted to sergeant about 10 or 11.
Right.
And then somebody suggested to me that why didn't I look at training? Well, I probably vowed never, ever, ever to go back teaching ever again.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, Julie, come on, play to your strengths. You've got this behind you. And so I went on an instructor's, it was called then, program, and I learnt more about teaching people in the 10-week instructor program than ever I learnt in 4 years at university.
Thank you for joining us on Success is a System. Watch out for an exciting part 2 with Julie Spence next week.